Welcome to Week 3 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Carson Fox, and this week our focus turns to the Case Western Reserve University Spartans, who enter Year 2 as an affiliate football-only member of the PAC, and are vying to rebound after showing signs of major improvement based on Week 1's performance. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program, highlight the week that was, and preview Saturday's matchup to get you ready for the beginning of conference competition. Make sure to stay tuned following the Football Focus. Two other Waynesburg University students and I will bring you the PAC Pregame Show, in which we'll take a look back at the last 2 weeks of non-conference play and spotlight the highlights of Week 3. 12th year Case Western Reserve head coach Greg Debeljak is well versed in building a successful program. From 2007 to 2009, he guided the Spartans to 3 consecutive undefeated seasons and had them on the national scene in the NCAA playoffs. As a member of the University Athletic Conference from 2006 to 2010, the Spartans boasted a 38-game winning streak. Last season, Case Western Reserve University and Carnegie Mellon University both joined the PAC as affiliate football-only members. Debeljak recalls the challenges of being a new member of a highly competitive league.
Well, I think last year sent a message that we have to do better in all aspects of our program, and off-season preparation and in-season preparation, recruiting. It's certainly it was an eye-opener. We knew about Thomas More and W&J and understood about how good those teams were, but didn't have a real feel of how deep the conference was until we went through it. So, I think the impact was we have to raise our game.
Last year, senior quarterback Billy Beecher was counted on as a dual-threat quarterback in both the run and pass game in the Spartans' offense, but he struggled with turnovers. This year, the Silver and Blue will look to sophomore Rob Kuda behind center, and in Week 1, the gunslinger lit it up against the University of Chicago for 339 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 59 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Debeljak has high hopes for his new starter.
They're very different quarterbacks. Billy was athletically, not as explosive, but really knew our system well. I think Rob is going to be a great quarterback at our level. I would compare him more to Dan Whalen, our 4-year starter and All-American. And I'm not saying that Rob is going to reach those heights, but he plays that kind of game. He's very elusive. People are going to have to account for him in the running game and his scrambles, and I'm sure it's going to maybe give some defensive coordinators some headaches trying to account for everything that he can do, because he can run, but he can also scramble and find open people on the run. So great start, and I'm looking for continued improvement from Rob. I think he can be a very, very good one.
In 2014, while Beecher did handle the majority of the carries, the Spartans gave 5 players on the team 30 carries or more. Debeljak has his eyes set on one player who could potentially break out as the team's lead man in the rotation this season.
Anthony Canganelli was our leading rusher last year as a freshman, and he didn't really play that role until about mid-season, and unfortunately he was unavailable for our Chicago game with an injury. But I think Anthony can play that role. Saying that, I think we do have a group of backs that can play roles within our system. So right now, unless somebody proves differently, we're going to rotate backs and give people opportunities until that one person surfaces.
One strong point of this Case Western Reserve offense is its depth at receiver. 5 of the top 7 leading receivers returned this season from a 2014 unit that produced solid numbers when Beecher was able to get the ball in their hands. According to Debeljak, Kuda is going to have a plethora of options this season in the passing game.
There's youth and experience. I think the bottom line is I don't remember a time when we've been more athletic on the outside. We have big receivers. We have small, quick receivers. We have all types. So, again, I think we're going to play a lot of kids. I think 8 kids caught passes in our first game against Chicago, and we're looking to spread the field and really spread the ball to everybody out there. So, again, makes the defense defend everyone and just not key in on one person. So I think that's going to help Rob, because defense can't stack up against one particular guy if we're spreading it around.
Specifically in the receiving corps, junior Brendan Lynch was a PAC honorable mention a year ago after he had 31 catches for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns in just 6 games played after suffering an ACL injury. Once he's good to go, Debeljak believes he can be a valuable member to the Spartan offense.
He's still kind of feeling his way. I mean, I think physically he's ready to be a great player like he was on the verge of last year. He caught 30 passes in the first 5 games, but I think mentally he's not there yet. He's still kind of getting confidence that his knee's okay. And if he's confident, he can do a lot of stuff. He's a very good route runner. He's great when he gets his hands on the ball. He threw a touchdown pass last year. He's a very versatile player. I think he's going to need some more game experience to gain confidence in that surgically repaired knee.
On the defensive side of the ball, Case Western Reserve returns 8 of its top 10 tacklers from a defense that finished 4th in total defense and was particularly stout against the run. But after surrendering 31 points in Week 1 to Chicago, Debeljak wants to see improvement from the defense if it wants to return as one of the top units in the PAC this season.
I think it has everything you're looking for. It has experience, physical play. We have enough experienced guys that we can go from a 3-man front to a 4-man front. We just have to hit our stride. We played extremely well against Chicago for portions of the game and really gave up some really critical errors that led to a lot of points. So we have to, kind of rebound from that. But we have the makings of being a very good defense. We didn't show it against Chicago for an entire 4 quarters.
2 weeks ago, Case Western Reserve battled the defending UAA champions from the University of Chicago to a 1-point loss on the road in what was one of the best matchups from Week 1. Debeljak saw many positive signs in that contest that he thinks will benefit the Spartans moving forward after having a week off in Week 2.
I think we played extremely hard. I think guys were excited. They were up to the challenge on the road, in a 90-degree day that took its toll on the field. That we never stopped playing hard, no matter where we were at on the scoreboard, and no matter how tired our guys got. Very pleased offensively. We didn't give up a sack. I don't think we gave up anything close to a sack. We had about 500 yards offense without really running the ball all that well. So there were some really real positives on offense. And defense, again, we played dominant at times. To force that many 3-and-outs against a good Chicago team that prides itself on ball control was a great sign. But there's stuff to build on there. We just have to, alleviate the big plays that happen. Lots of positives, but also just heartbreaking because we put so much effort into this game, and we really believed Chicago was a very good team, and we believed we could beat them. And it'd be up 2 scores in the 4th and not finish was heartbreaking, but not discouraging. I think the guys realized that we have potential to be good, but we got to finish games and we got to do our assignments. And we're going to be playing some teams better than Chicago this year in the PAC, so we have to improve.
After forcing a league-low 12 turnovers a year ago, Debeljak is making it a focal point to his defense in 2015 to turn the tide with more turnovers.
It's been definitely a point of emphasis from the spring on. It's the first thing in our manual. It's the title page in our defensive manual is get the ball. And it's been drilled into our guys' heads, and we just didn't make it happen against Chicago, a team that takes care of the ball very well. You're not going to win the game if you end up on the negative end of the turnover spectrum. So it's something we'll continue to stress and strive, and I'm sure we're going to get there.
On the schedule this week, the Spartans host St. Vincent, who is riding high after a win against Waynesburg. Bearcat quarterback Evan Sheminski was dominant in the win, passing for 288 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Jackets. Debeljak has a multitude of ideas on how to stop him this week, but he says it's all going to come down to execution by his defense.
He's a big playmaker, no doubt about that. He's very elusive. I'm sure he's going to put up good running stats, but his scrambling ability and just buying himself more time to throw to a ton of speed, both on the perimeter and coming out of the backfield, is certainly a concern. We certainly have game plan to try and contain him, to try and spy, to contain rush, but it's easy to talk about that, and you can practice it, but until you get out there, an athlete of Evan's ability, it's going to be tough. It's easier said than done.
St. Vincent's pass defense was able to force 2 interceptions last week, including one that proved to be on the game-tying drive for Waynesburg. Going up against this vaunting secondary, Debeljak believes it all comes down to if the offense can protect Kuda from the rush and give him enough time to get the ball out to his skill players.
The one thing that St. Vincent does is they pressure. I mean, they are a 3-4 defense, and they play a lot like the Steelers. They're going to pressure you, and they could come from anywhere. I think taking care of the ball is critical, obviously being sound with our protection schemes. And if we can hold up, or if Rob can buy some time, because he's, I think, a very good scrambler also, I think there are openings out there. They have a good defensive backcourt, but I think most of the issues are pressure. Pressure leads to turnovers. They will certainly do that, and if we can't account for their pressure, it might lead to some negative plays. So we're working real hard on that this week.
Looking long-term, Debeljak believes that he and his coaching staff can restore Case Western Reserve football to national prominence if they can improve their national recruiting efforts, while continuing to be a presence in the Division III hotbeds of Western Pennsylvania and Ohio, which now has become an even greater pipeline with the Spartans joining the PAC.
And we do need to be a nationally recruiting school. You know, our roster has turned into that, but now it's one thing to say that you have starters from 16 different states, but if they're not up to the level of play that you're playing against, that's really not saying much. So continue our recruiting efforts locally and getting as many Ohio and Western PA kids as we can, but going out all over the country and finding those kids that want a great education at one of the best universities in the world, but also want to have football be a huge part of their experience at college, and finding guys that can play at our level, because that's been the challenge in recruiting nationally.
As for the time being, Debeljak wants his players' heads tuned into the here and now to win the week, no matter who's the opponent.
I don't think this league is a league that you can look at and say, hey, we want to go 7-3 or 8-2 or, get nationally ranked. There's just too many challenges every week. And that really came from the players that when we set our goals, it was let's go 1-0 every week. You just can't look past any week. So going 1-0 each week is what we're hoping to accomplish.
Thanks again to head coach Greg Debeljak and Case Western Reserve University for being featured as this week's PAC Football Focus. Coming up next week, we'll focus on another team that is heading into year 2 in the PAC, and that's head coach Rich Lackner and his Carnegie Mellon University Tartans. Stay with us. After the break, it's the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org.
I'm Joe Underko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
And welcome back. It's the PAC Pregame Show. Carson Fox alongside Andy Stanko and Sean Saputo for Week 3. Our preview. We'll take a look back at Week 2 to start it off. But guys, how are you doing? What did you think of last week's play-in conference?
Well, Sean, I'll let you hit on the W&J game. That was certainly a highlight for my week this past weekend. But I'm going to talk about Waynesburg and St. Vincent. The Bearcats beating Waynesburg and really knocking Waynesburg solidly into that middle tier in the PAC. They've been in that upper tier the last few seasons, 10-1 in 2012, 7-4 in 2013, 8-3 in 2014. They hadn't lost to a team not named W&J, Thomas More, or Bethany in a long time, not since 2011. So this really marks Waynesburg falling out of that upper tier. And really, the top tier now in the PAC, it has to be W&J, Thomas More, some distance, and then Bethany, and now everyone's jockeying for that number 4 spot.
And I don't want to hit on the W&J game too much, as we'll hit on it a little bit later, but we really saw one of the powers of this conference be exposed some against a team that we didn't expect much out of after last week's 17-9 victory over Hiram. So W&J, a scare at home, and we'll have to see if they capitalize this week.
And then so close, but so far away for the Grove City Wolverines, who lost a nail-biter at home to Geneva 21-16. Unfortunately for the Wolverines, it just was not quarterback Antonio Carosia's day as he threw 5 interceptions, including 3 on Grove City's last 3 offensive possessions in the fourth quarter when the team was trying to make a comeback. The red and white defense was great, forcing 10.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, a forced fumble, interception, and a block kick. Just the offense, like I said last week, still needs time to gel, but I completely agree with you on that Westminster W&J game. They made Pete Coughlin look human, holding him to just 210 passing yards, forcing 2 interceptions, sacking him 4 times, and then really against a stout front 7, running back Dominique McKinley rushing for 163 yards. And we were calling this W&J squad a juggernaut a week ago, but Westminster certainly put its name to the test in a close 35-31 loss. And then we have to mention it, Thomas More, 84-7 over Hanover without quarterback Jensen Gebhardt even starting. Complete domination for the Saints, who have looked like an unstoppable force so far this season. I think the Thomas More W&J matchup later this season keeps getting bigger and bigger, guys, and this was just another example of it.
Absolutely, and I agree to an extent with W&J being exposed. You mentioned it, Sean, but when you're chasing a championship, when you're a top-tier team, you have to go through these. You're going to be challenged by other teams in your conference, and every week, on paper, W&J probably will be favored, but it's just survive and advance. You just need to win all of the games on your schedule, and they were able to do it. 2.5 minutes, they trailed by whatever margin they needed, a touchdown to win the game. They went and got the touchdown. They're still the cream of the crop in the conference.
Trailed 31-28 and got that touchdown to make it 35-31. But really, this Thomas More team has proven to be the strongest in the PAC so far. I can't see how you can go against that yet. A big win against St. John's Fisher the first week, a ranked opponent, came out against a less talented Hanover team this week and really took the ball against them without their starting quarterback Jensen Gebhardt, with Brendan Kuntz going 13 of 19 for 228, 3 touchdowns. But really, when you look at Thomas More, the difference for them is they had 17 drives total in the game, 12 touchdowns, and then 4 ended in turnovers, and then 1 ended at the end of the game.
So that's week 2. We'll preview all of the games coming up this week in week 3 as we begin non-conference play, and this is really when when the rubber hits the road, as they like to say. 5 conference matchups and this week, and we'll start it right off. Beginning with the Teal Tomcats, who are coming into this contest with a 1-1 record at the number 15 team in the country according to D3Football.com, the Thomas More Saints, who are now having their 3rd straight home game to start out the season, 2-0, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. And Teal hasn't beat Thomas More since September of 2006 in what was a 17-14 contest, and in 4 out of Thomas More's 5 wins versus Teal during that span, the Saints have beaten the Tomcats by deficits of 21 points or more. Now, guys, this was a game at halftime that Teal was leading 27-21 when Ryan Radke rushed for a touchdown with 10 seconds remaining in the second quarter. What do we see in this matchup against the Tomcats and the Saints?
Well, if you remember last year's matchup, after that halftime, Thomas More would go on to outscore Teal 45-0 to hang 66 on the Tomcats, a season high for the Saints a season ago. And really looking at Teal, I was extremely disappointed with the effort against Bethany on Saturday. Coming out of week 1, don't know how much you can take away over a win against a team like Allegheny College. Running for 334 yards, 7 yards a carry. I was excited about Teal having a couple of backs, Kevin Daly, Evan Imgrund, who really potentially could have been guys around him, like we've seen Josh Potter, Josh Wanamaker for Teal, but they couldn't move the football at all against Bethany. 2.4 yards a carry. And outside of the 2 scoring drives to really start the third quarter, 3 turnovers on downs, 4 punts, a safety, a fumble. This team held the football for 40 minutes and put up 16 points. Really, the team held the ball for 12 minutes in the first quarter and trailed 14-3. The real story for this game was Teal's defense being porous against a Bethany offense that marched down the field and scored 5 times in a minute 5 or faster. Really, if you're Teal, you're looking at a Thomas More team that has had no trouble outscoring opponents 132-7 through this point in the season. I'm concerned about protecting Ryan Radke. I'm concerned about this getting into a blowout situation early, especially with the Saints rolling on all cylinders. And Teal, I don't know if you can count on anyone outside of Radke, offensively or defensively.
And when you mention Ryan Radke, when you look at it, if you take away his dimension of running, which Bethany did, 17 carries for 49 yards, and make him a throwing quarterback, that's where we've seen Ryan Radke have his issues, going 19 of 37, just over 50% clip through the air, 191 yards. He did protect the football, however, with 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. But Ryan Radke, as a one-dimensional quarterback, is when Teal starts to fall into some trouble. And against the Thomas More defense that creates turnovers, you have to be able to protect Ryan Radke, as Andy said, or if not, Ryan Radke's going to have a long day not only in the air, but on the ground as well.
Well, I think it's extremely tough when you ask of a quarterback to make a comeback after being down 35-3 at halftime. I mean, that ultimately makes Ryan Radke have to be a passer. And what he's good at is whenever his offense can control the clock, and he can make plays using both his using his legs and his arm. So when you force him to be a pocket passer, that's taking him completely out of this element. But to go along the lines of the Saints last week, complete and utter destruction of a Hanover team that wasn't really in the same league as Thomas More. And what was crazy was they did it without Jensen Gebhardt, as we mentioned earlier on in the show. They set 4 school records in this contest, including points scored in a single game. They had 623 yards of total offense, nearly 9 yards per play, and 10 offensive touchdowns were scored. The only thing I will say is that the Saints did lose 3 fumbles in this contest. It's hard to believe, given the scoreboard. And defensively, the Saints were great, holding the Panthers under 200 offensive yards. They only scored on that last drive of the game when most of the second teamers were in, and they had 4 interceptions, 2 which were returned for touchdowns. It's going to be a tough effort when you look at it on paper, given the high-powered offense that Thomas More has against this Teal defense that struggled against a Bethany team that still was working in a second week starting quarterback.
And for Teal's offense in that game, if Bethany doesn't gift Teal 161 yards of penalties, I don't know how productive Teal is at all. This is a team that averaged under 4 yards per play and was outgained by Bethany by over 150 yards despite running 30 more plays in the game. This team and this very young defense was gashed for big plays over and over. Bethany was only 3 for 9 on third down. That's not too bad of a clip defensively, but they were scoring on big plays. Eric Blinn, of course, returned to form in the PAC. He scorched them for 185 yards, 3 touchdowns.
And now they have Goose Cohorn, who's arguably been right behind Eric Blinn through two games.
Week 1 had 200 yards through the air.
Yep.
So this
who
is
are you
offense.
going to choose? Who are you going to stop?
It's going to be extremely challenging. The defense was a question. The skill position guys around Radke were a question. And now they're playing a team that's much closer and even better than Bethany than they are to an Allegheny College team. Teal is in way over, or they could be in way over their heads, especially early on. But I do want to touch on Thomas More. The punter never had to touch the field. They didn't allow a point over their first 7 quarters, and really the schedule helps them out. They only have 4 road games: Westminster, St. Vincent, Grove City, and Case. Bethany not on the schedule. We've been really high on W&J this whole year for good reason. But Thomas More is breathing down their necks. They're at that 15 spot by D3Football.com. We keep talking about it. That matchup is going to be insane. I'm looking forward to it. Thomas More.
The Thomas More has a lot of ball security issues, as you had mentioned, Carson, and brought up earlier. Despite the 12 touchdowns, the other drives for the offense, all 4 ended in turnovers. 3 fumble and an interception, no punts. So despite the ability of Thomas More to be a great offensive team, stout defense at the same time, they're having its issues with ball security, and that's what is going to need to be worked on, especially when you get to W&J in a couple weeks, because we saw last year how it ended with Thomas More losing due to turnovers.
You're right. But so far, so good from the the two-headed monster in the backfield with C.T. Tarrant and Javier Pitts. I think they're already on the fast track of being what Dominique Hayden and Tarrant were last year. I just think you're asking Ryan Radke to play like Johnny Manziel out there, and that is a tough thing to ask of any quarterback in this league. So we'll have to see how that game goes. Once again, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. The Thomas More Saints hosting the Teal Tomcats. But let's move on, guys, and another two teams that performed well. Bethany coming up with the win and Westminster coming up with the loss. Both teams are 1-1. Westminster on the road on a 1 o'clock kickoff in Bethany, West Virginia. And guys, 4 times since the year 2008, the winner of this matchup won by 3 points or fewer. And last year, it was a 21-14 win in overtime for Bethany. One of the more underrated rivalries, I guess you could see in the President's Athletic Conference. But in this contest, it was really a sloppy game in which 6 combined turnovers happened. Both teams were less than 33% on third down offensively. And then Jalen Holmes really busted it 14 yards for a touchdown in overtime. So what do we see in this matchup between the Titans and the Bison?
I am really excited for this game, not only because it's the opener for both teams in conference play, but also it gets a chance to really give us an indication of where Westminster stands in the PAC. Did they just get up for W&J, the best team or one of the best teams in the conference, if not the country? Or are they really going to be a team that's going to compete, maybe fill the void that Waynesburg has left when they've taken a step back? And Westminster, after being such a disappointment week 1 offensively against Hiram, they put together a game against W&J, led by 3 with 2.5 minutes to play. But really, what excites me about Westminster against Hiram, defensively, they were outstanding. 87 yards for W&J and Ryan Ruffing is unheard of these last 2 seasons. The only team to do it last year was Wittenberg in the playoffs, that first round game. And this is the same Westminster defense, for the most part, that allowed Dominique Hayden to run for over 300 yards. Ryan Ruffing gashed him for 172 yards last year. That's outstanding improvement and progression from Westminster, 2 big takeaways, an interception for a touchdown. The other one set up another touchdown. They hit Pete Coughlin, sacked him 4 times, and ruining drives. Rich Ellaby, what more can I say? 4 tackles, 3 for a loss, 2 sacks. He single-handedly spoiled 2 W&J drives. Unfortunately, the Presidents played like the PAC champs that they are, or they were last season. They scored every time they touched the ball in the fourth quarter. You had long touchdowns or contributions from McKinley, Bentley, Kim. I couldn't have asked for more from Westminster outside of winning this football game. I was really excited by the way they played against W&J, and this is a chance to gauge if that's going to be a week-to-week thing with Bethany.
And we'll be able to see this week if Westminster is able to run against a great front 7, much like they did against W&J's front 7. Bethany, definitely a solid front 7 they have there, but Paul Colombo, if they want to win this game, is really going to have to throw the ball a lot better. 9 for 19, only 125 yards, a touchdown and an interception in that game. Paul Colombo, if the run game is shut down by a very stout Bethany front 7, it's going to have to go through the air with Paul Colombo. And if it relies on the arm of Paul Colombo, that is where problems could become.
I think he's still developing a rapport with this new receiving core. I mean, just 9 completions on the day in this game. Granted, against that W&J defense that is one of the most formidable in not only the conference but the country. But yeah, just 9 completions on the day. I think quietly Dominique McKinley is becoming one of the upper echelon backs in this conference, and I think they have a great complement to him in Kimu Kim, who had 2 touchdowns in this contest. And then from Bethany, I mean, we have to hit on it. I mean, we mentioned it earlier, but Eric Blinn, coming back to Eric Blinn form. 12 catches, 185 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, and a rushing touchdowns. He moved into the record books for most touchdown receptions in Bethany history. I think as long as new starting quarterback Lincoln Reyes gets the ball in his hands, it's going to be a good day, and he's one of the most dynamic playmakers in this conference. But I also want to highlight the emergence of Jalen Holmes, the running back. 166 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on just 12 carries. The defense was sensational. I mean, as we said earlier, forcing 2 turnovers and sacking Ryan Radke 7 times. This proves to be a very interesting matchup between 2 of the most stout defenses in this conference. I just think that Westminster will have more of a challenge because the Titans will have to keep one, maybe two defenders locked on Blinn the entire game.
You mentioned last year's game, Bethany's defense. Donovan Hayden, Larry Potier, Nadeem Radar, 10 tackles for loss between them, 4 sacks, 2 and a forced fumble. Those guys are big time. Those guys are huge names in this conference. Defensively, they're some of the studs that you see in the PAC. And Bethany, really looking at this team and the performance last week, they might have the third best offense in the PAC. Eric Blinn's probably the best receiver. Jalen Holmes is developing into a really good back. And if Lincoln Reyes can play like he did last week, 16 for 24, 244 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns, running for 57 yards and another touchdown, Bethany today, in my opinion, is the best team in the PAC, not named, of course, W&J and Thomas More. And you mentioned Eric Blinn, Jalen Holmes. They had at least 9 plays with 20 or more yards. They dropped 5 drives of 63 or 65 seconds or fewer. The concern for this team for me is when guys really key in on Blinn and other coaches say, we're taking him out of the game no matter the costs. Only 3 other players caught passes last week. Tyler Ambush, 3 for 34, 2 guys with just 1 grab. I wouldn't be surprised if Westminster goes all out on trying to stop Eric Blinn. But otherwise, last week defensively, 2 touchdowns to start the second half against Bethany. 0 complaints. They got Ryan Radke 7 times in the backfield, held Teal to 104 yards rushing, 0 for 3 on fourth down, Bethany, really no complaints from their side, especially after a strong game last week. But to touch on Westminster, on their final scoring drive, they ran the ball 10 consecutive times on W&J. That is just imposing your will when you're running the football. And you mentioned 2 of the backs. They also have Demetrius Bentley, who had a long touchdown last year against W&J.
He's playing receiver also on this team.
Yeah, he's catching the ball very well. He did it last year. He's an explosive option. They have a stable of backs. I'm really excited for this football game.
And really, Andy, it's hard to go off of all the points that you just made, and I'll keep it short and simple. We had mentioned last week you can't take much away from a Bethany team that went to Alliance, Ohio to play Mount Union week 1.
Yeah.
You couldn't take the fact that Blinn had 5 receptions for 18 yards in that game. Really, we knew what Eric Blinn was made of. We knew coming into PAC play he was going to do what he does every year, year in and year out, and make a big impact. And he did that. Jalen Holmes also made a very big impact. This is going to be probably the best game of the week in the PAC.
And it's hard to play at Bethany. It really is.
It is.
So moving on, we take a look at the number 14 team in the country according to the D3Football.com rankings, the Washington and Jefferson Presidents, who come into this game 2-0 at the Carnegie Mellon Tartans, who are 0-1. The game, it's a 1 o'clock kickoff in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And CMU owns the all-time record, believe it or not, 32-27-5 in this series, but most of those contests, as we all know, were played in the previous century. And in 2014, the Tartans refused to lie down in this contest, trailing 42-14 nearing the end of the third quarter. They finished the game with just an 18-point deficit, but this was really W&J quarterback Pete Coughlin's breakout game. He had 333 passing yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. Ryan Ruffing was a monster with 193 yards on 25 carries and 2 touchdowns, and the President's defense forced 3 turnovers. So guys, Carnegie Mellon's had a week off to prepare for this matchup. What do we see between both teams that will be wearing black and red in this contest?
Well, what we've seen out of W&J in the past is when close games happen, they don't usually let it be close the next week. And to use that as a reference, you look at Waynesburg last year when they lost 31-28 in the final week of the season. They went on to play Wittenberg in the playoffs and rolled in that game. So we aren't accustomed to seeing W&J play back-to-back close games. And with a Carnegie Mellon team that was blown out in week 1 by Washington, and now with the week off, we'll see really if Carnegie Mellon was able to draw up some schemes, much like Westminster did, and they probably had people there watching that game with the week off to see what they could use against W&J that Westminster did. I don't see Pete Coughlin going 19 of 35 for just 2 interceptions, and it's difficult to see Ryan Ruffing go out for just 84 yards on 24 attempts, even though he did run for 4 touchdowns on the day. This W&J team did not play its best game of the season early on, but still managed to pull out the victory. Carnegie Mellon has a lot to deal with against W&J and a lot of weapons.
And I'll jump in here, guys. I mean, we forgot to mention earlier, but 35-31 game for those who didn't tune into that contest last week between W&J and Westminster. But a guy that I have to give a shout-out to for the Presidents, return man Anthony Cariotis. If I stole that point away from you, Andy, I'm sorry, but the Presidents were down 3 points with 2:18 left to play in the regulation. Cariotis comes up with a huge 44-yard kickoff return, setting up Coughlin with a short field to work with, and we've seen firsthand experience last year in late game situations in the matchup against Waynesburg how Coughlin is arguably the best quarterback in this conference in late game situations with his team down. He drives the Presidents down to the 1-yard line, allowing Ryan Ruffing to punch it in from the 1-yard line on 4th down, essentially winning the game for W&J. So at the end of the season, we might be giving credit to Anthony Cariotis for maintaining that perfect season. So we have to give a shout out to him. And I mean, it was a contest that I think some people on the outside, when you look back at that Westminster game, that would say this is an example of W&J complacency. In a night game at home, a non-conference matchup against a Westminster opponent who could really barely beat Hiram the week before, 17-9. It just wasn't the type of performance that we're accustomed to from this W&J team.
And I'm really interested to see how the Presidents offensively respond, because you look at last week's game, really 23 points for Westminster were directly a result of the ineptitude of the offense. You look at both first half touchdowns were set up by interceptions, either a short field or the interception for a touchdown. A safety was set up by a drive that didn't go in anywhere. And then all of a sudden you have a long touchdown pass to Demetrius Bentley, and oh no, Westminster has over 20 points, and now it's a football game. The W&J defense, I don't really have many complaints. They were solid all day. Only allowed 10 first downs. Westminster 4 for 16 on 3rd down. 8 3-and-outs, 2 takeaways. Just that last drive where Westminster marched 73 yards with 10 straight rushing plays, including a 4th and 1 on that drive. That's the only place, of course, in the big play where I can complain for this defense. But you mentioned it. The special teams, not only just the player you highlighted, but all season, both games. 2 returns led directly to touchdowns in week 2, 4 returns of 30 yards or more back in week 1. The defense was incredibly solid after the Westminster touchdown drive. This team does so many things well and puts itself in positions to win football games, even when things aren't going great, especially with Pete Coughlin. Multiple turnovers in this game. That's not what you're looking for out of him, not being able to run the football as well. But at the end of the day, they were able to get it done, and they put themselves in these positive positions with their defense, with their special teams. And to the credit of that offensive unit, they had a bad day, and they were able to shake it off and make a 2-minute run. And CMU, as you guys all highlighted, they had their hands full. I didn't really recognize this team looking at the stat sheet, putting up 500 yards of offense back in week 1, Carnegie Mellon. In that 45-24 game, I don't know what happened in the second half, only 7 points in the second half, 1 for 9 on 3rd down. They missed out on a couple of red zone chances. And in the first 3 drives, they spotted Washington 10 points with turnovers. So they can't be making those mistakes against a W&J caliber team. Sam Banger, I'm excited about, though. He was an all-PAC honorable mention last season. Ran for 200 yards in the opener. They need him to be productive, and they need to hold the football against W&J.
Yeah, let's see if Sam Banger can repeat his performance. He had over 100 yards against Washington in the season finale a year ago, and a 200-yard performance. 204-yard performance in week 1. Let's see what he can do against the W&J defense that gave up as many yards as we mentioned earlier about Dominique McKinley. But I really do think this is an enticing bounce-back matchup for Coughlin. I mean, look for big days from Dan Liss and Eric Scott and even Jesse Zubik, who returned last week from injury. But I think Andrew Herron, he was just 27 for 46 for still a respectable 286 yards. But just his fourth quarter interception that was returned 88 yards was essentially the nail in the coffin for his fourth quarter comeback. Now, I think he has a plethora of weapons to throw to on the outside, and CMU gives him the leeway to throw nearly 50 times 2 weeks ago. I just agree. I agree with you completely, Andy. I think if he can be smart with the ball against an aggressive defense and can hold, and his offensive line can hold this stout W&J front seven back to allow him to have time to get the ball out to his receivers' hands. That's how this offense can be successful. But expect heavy doses of Sam Banger.
And yeah, with Sam Banger, as Andy and yourself just mentioned, I really want to see if John Prather and Graham Schillen can repeat their success from week 1 and week 2 against this W&J secondary, where Prather had 9 receptions for 94 yards, and then Schillen added 8 receptions for 107 yards in the 2 touchdown passes. So we'll see if that receiving core can break down the W&J secondary. But again, will we see back-to-back games where the W&J defense is not on par in what it was said and made out to be by head coach Sirianni in week 1?
So let's move on. Our next matchup, our second-to-last matchup, features a team that we are all familiar with. The Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets are 1-1, and they are on the road for the 3rd straight week in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, to take on a Geneva team that's also 1-1, a 7 o'clock kickoff. And guys, we remember last year Waynesburg going 1-1 in night contests, winning on the road at Teal, but losing on the road at Bethany. But they're playing against a Geneva team that they have won the last 5 contests against. But 3 years ago, when they were on the road at Beaver Falls, it was just a 1-point game, 21-20. And we all remember this game from a year ago, 44 win in overtime. Waynesburg putting up 44 points. It was then freshman Aaron Channing's breakout game, 22 for 31, 317 passing yards and 5 touchdowns. Lem Fowler and Josh Geiser combined for over 200 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns, but they're both gone from this team. Nate Cannon picked off Carter Hill twice, but Hill had the last laugh with a touchdown pass to Zach Kappen in overtime for the win, but they're both gone. Guys, what do we see from these teams that have seen a lot of turnover from the last year?
Yeah, Carson, that was a lovely recap, but I'm not sure how much any of that matters, considering
exactly right.
So many of the playmakers on either side. Aaron Channing had one of his career days against Waynesburg, but the guys who he was passing to, just about all of them are gone. Most notably, as you mentioned, Lem Fuller and Josh Geiser. And then for Waynesburg, the top passer, receiver, number 2, 3 receivers, top rusher, all gone, and we're really starting from scratch with this Waynesburg team. It lost to a team not named W&J Thomas More or Bethany for the first time since 2011. Jake Doherty, we were expecting these growing pains. We saw them in these crisis situations, 16 for 34, 189, a touchdown, but 2 interceptions, both of very similar variety. It was in a 2-minute drill situation at the end of the first half and at the end of the game. He was under pressure. He was being pursued, and he let go of a pass where he wasn't stepping into it, but he was off of his back foot, and both times the ball just floated into the arms of the defensive back. And with this Waynesburg offense, we haven't seen them march 70 yards for a touchdown yet. You look at the scoring drives for Waynesburg, set up against Muskingum, a bunch of turnovers, set up here against St. Vincent, 60 yards of penalties on the first 2 scoring drives against the Bearcats. And then for the final scoring drive, they have to convert multiple first downs after a great kick return. We've been accustomed to a really strong Waynesburg offense with skill position players on the outside, Bernie Thompson, Andrew English, and a running attack last year that really got started, over 1,000 yards for Jake Forsyth. This team, these playmakers aren't up to par with what we're used to seeing, and they're learning on the fly, and we certainly can tell through their play on the field. These guys had their moments, the 2-minute drive, Kevin Barnes' touchdown, some excellent plays, but really Waynesburg is starting from scratch here offensively, and we just can't have Willie Lavelle having so few touches, Tim Cooper not catching a ball in the first half. It's going to be really challenging to win football games, especially when the secondary seems much more porous now without Josh Mundell, allowing Sheminsky to throw for over 280 yards and 4 touchdowns without an interception. So Waynesburg, a team not without its warts, going against a Geneva team that came away with a win last week, traditionally very good at home, very good under the lights. Nothing's free for Waynesburg anymore. We used to be able to, last season, look at the schedule, just pencil in some W's here and there, and really look forward to the Bethanys, the W&Js, the Thomas Moores. Now Waynesburg has to fight for everything, and this Geneva team, the way they handled Grove City, especially defensively, is a concern.
And to go off your point, touchdown drives for Waynesburg, 52, 54, and 55 yards against St. Vincent. So to continue off Andy's point there, But really, when I look at this game on paper, again, it's another coin flip game, and I really expect to see Waynesburg use its running attack more this week. Jake Doherty throwing 34 passes, not even completing 50% of those. But then when you look at Geneva, what Aaron Channing did against Waynesburg last year, expect to see Geneva, I think, throw the football more often than not than the running game, simply due to the fact, as mentioned, Josh Mundell hurt. Dante Gibson might be out with a lower body injury this week. We'll have to keep tabs on that one. So really, this secondary has already been limited in what it can do for Waynesburg, and Aaron Channing, we've seen, has the ability to pick apart a defense and a secondary as a whole, but Dylan Jones is also going to be Dylan Jones, the running back for Geneva, will also play a big factor in opening play action passing for Aaron Channing.
Yeah, I'm just really intrigued to see how Aaron Channing performs. I looked up some stats and going to hit you with some numbers. Since that 317-yard passing performance against Waynesburg a year ago, he hasn't thrown for over 300 yards again, and in fact, he's only had two 200-plus yard performances.
He dealt with injuries, though, too, last year.
That's true, but, I mean, he's already been sacked 9 times through 2 games, and we talked about this last week. Like Colombo, he's working with a whole new cast of receivers. I mean, finally, we got to see Dylan Jones get going last week, but he's definitely facing a tougher Waynesburg front 7. And then on the flip side, I think it's going to be tough sledding for Jake Doherty again. I mean, going up against a Nate Cannon-led secondary. I mean, Nate Cannon picked off Carter Hill twice last year in this contest, and he was arguably the best quarterback in school history. And Doherty, again, just his 3rd collegiate start. And the secondary also includes Tim Martin, Thomas Benyo, and also looking for a solid effort out of the middle from linebacker John Fiskus, who was named the PAC's Defensive Player of the Week last year. He had 2 interceptions in this contest. So I expect heavy doses of the run game. So far, Jerry Lawman is number 4. I know it's early, but number 4 in the conference with over 200 yards rushing, and he's 2nd in the conference with 4 rushing touchdowns. We've seen good efforts out of Zach Helsel, the 2nd running back in the rotation. So I expect another close contest. I mean, another night game. We talked about it at the beginning of this segment. Waynesburg's not accustomed to playing these night games, but again, I mean, when Geneva can barely beat Grove City, it is, as you said, Andy, one of those wins the preseason you'd like to chalk down with already saying that they're going to win this contest.
Yeah, but you can't when you look at last week, and I was really disappointed with Waynesburg with the play of the offensive line, especially late in that game. 2 huge, crippling penalties against the Yellow Jacket, where the defense sets up Waynesburg on the St. Vincent 18-yard line, and then a personal foul and a holding penalty, and Waynesburg gets no points out of it after being gifted a first down by the officials on a holding penalty, a defensive holding penalty on a ball that was overthrown and questionable. It was disappointing, especially considering how this offensive line prides itself on being the focal point of this offense and the personality of this team. And on the other side, I was really surprised to see Dylan Jones run for 100 yards because Geneva...
We don't see that from him.
Geneva, they have fewer rushing attempts and ran for fewer yards than anyone last season. So we'll see if that continues. But one thing they did do, Geneva, was get after the quarterback. 7 sacks last week, and that's one thing we keep saying. We love this Geneva secondary, but let's see what happens when they put on the pressure. 7 sacks, 5 interceptions. These guys are opportunistic. They returned a blocked PAT for a touchdown. Nate Cannon, of course. I expect to see him all over the field and make an impact on this football game. Really, I think the reason that Waynesburg, I felt good going into St. Vincent is they'd be able to run the ball and stop the run, and they bottled up St. Vincent's run game well. We'll see how Channing goes against the pass defense now with Mundell out. That really has turned into a question mark for this Waynesburg team.
And St. Vincent saw that running the football last week was not working against Waynesburg's front 7, which has remained intact for the most part. Only 97 yards, and also holding Shavonta Kraft to 25 yards on 9 carries. And after noticing that, St. Vincent went with the passing method, and Shavonta Kraft reeled in 5 receptions for 81 yards on the day. So 317 total yards passing by St. Vincent, 288 of those by Evan Sheminsky on a 19 for 28 clip, and 20 for 29 as a team. St. Vincent was for 317 yards, 4 touchdowns, and St. Vincent didn't turn the ball over against Waynesburg. in the interception category, that is, but it really was a secondary that was picked apart. We expected to see more run design plays with Evan Szyminski, but even Evan Szyminski with the arm was able to pick apart Waynesburg's defense. Another matchup that seems to be a good one in the PAC this week.
All right, let's move on. Our featured matchup of the week, the St. Vincent Bearcats. We've talked a whole lot about them in that last segment. Picking up that huge win and riding high in a home win against Waynesburg, now improved to 1-1 on the season, and are on the road, 7 o'clock kickoff in Cleveland, Ohio, against the Case Western Reserve University Spartans, who are 0-1 after losing a 1-point contest 2 weeks ago at the defending University Athletic Association champion Chicago. And both coaches have said that this contest a year ago was a defining contest to both of their seasons. And in 2014, this game is remembered for St. Vincent breaking its 22-game losing streak, a 23-20 win for the Bearcats, who scored 13 unanswered points from midway through the third quarter to win that contest. That was still a pretty forgettable game in respect that no returners from that game really lit it up on the score sheet. Case had 2 turnovers that hurt its chances in this contest. Guys, what do we see between the Bearcats and the Spartans?
I look at Case Western, and I'm surprised at week 1, the quarterback play of Rob Kuda, who threw for 339 yards on 21 of 35 for 3 touchdowns. Billy Beecher, last season we expected to be one of the top quarterbacks in the PAC, and didn't really show that. And then coming into this year, you had the question of, all right, who's going to take over for Case Western at the quarterback position? And Rob Kuda in week 1 proved that he was there, and he's there to stay. And for St. Vincent, on the other hand, did a great job in the secondary, only allowing Waynesburg 189 yards with another new starting quarterback. So we'll see if that St. Vincent secondary is able to continue its success that it's had on the season against Rob Kuda. But with Case Western's defense, another great front 7 in the PAC, holding that Chicago team to only 79 yards rushing in the game. And St. Vincent, as we had just mentioned not too long ago, really went away from the run game and focused on the pass. So we'll see if that will be the case, as Case Western's defense almost allowed 300 yards through the air as well.
The bottom line of the St. Vincent game, and really the biggest takeaways for me, have to be from last week. Szyminski is the real deal. St. Vincent flat out made more plays than Waynesburg did, and now we're in position with a favorable schedule, no W&J in the conference schedule, to make a run for an upper half finish in the PAC. Dustin Lohman really stood out to me in terms of the big plays in this game. The 79-yard touchdown early on, and then the 36-yard touchdown. It was a 4th down in the second half. And that's one play Waynesburg's defense wishes it could have back. And 4 or 5 guys had a shot at him. None of them were able to bring him down. Lohman goes on, scores. That ends up being the game-winning touchdown. And you have to give it to Shavante Kraft for being resourceful, that coaching staff, for using his entire skill set. 81 yards through the air. You mentioned it, Sean. He's one of the more versatile backs in all of the PAC. I'm concerned for St. Vincent, the 1 for 10 third down performance, 1 for 3 fourth down performance, and that game had so many penalties. 13 for 137 yards just gifted to Waynesburg. But outside of that, they kept Waynesburg under wraps offensively, held Waynesburg under 4 yards of carry, picked off Doherty twice in 2-minute situations, and this defense only gave up 26 points to John Carroll. They're relatively strong against a traditional power that put up 40 points. John Carroll did in 8 of 10 games last season. John Carroll only lost to Mount Union twice last year by a combined 15 points. That week 1 performance, I think, really was a coming-out party for this St. Vincent defense that really gifted Waynesburg its 2 scoring drives in the first half and 2 fourth down conversions in the second half.
And head coach Greg Debeljak of Case Western Reserve just raved about how this St. Vincent defense forces pressure, and that's one of the things that he talks about is why that secondary is so successful in forcing turnovers, is the pressure. We'll have to see how Rob Kuda does against that pressure. I think he's going to have a successful day. I like this Case Western offense a lot in this matchup. It's very similar to Bethany's of 2 years ago with Matt Grimard. They like to dink and dunk the ball with a lot of bubble screens and let let Kuda's wide receivers do the work. So I think if St. Vincent continues to have that, engage 8 philosophy, let's get pressure, let's throw the kitchen sink at Rob Kuda in this matchup. He has a lot of guys on the outside with experience. It's going to leave the cornerbacks out on an island, and he does have the ability to scramble. But I think on the flip side, also with quarterback play, and it seems like a lot of the storylines in this week is quarterback play in these matchups. Cheminsky showed last week what he can do running and passing the football. I think he's going against a battle-tested defense that is well-rested, opposed to Waynesburg's that, as we mentioned, was banged up. We'll just have to finally see if this Case Western Reserve defense can break the game open with a turnover. Didn't force a turnover in the Week 1 matchup against the Chicago team that Debeljak told me is traditionally good at keeping control of the ball, but they were last in the President's Athletic Conference last year with just 12 turnovers forced. So I think momentum could completely change in this game one way or the other if Case Western Reserve can force a touchdown and likewise keep control of the ball.
Well, with Case Western, their leading receivers both had 4 receptions, and 9 receivers as a whole were used in that contest. So Kuda has his different targets that he can use, especially with tight end Ethan Albers, who had 2 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown. But I think the one thing that St. Vincent's going to need to work on is special teams in terms of punting. A 31.3 average yard per punt and a 29 average net in terms of punting. And against the Case Western team that proved that it's might be better than it was last year, I think for St. Vincent to continue to strive throughout the year, they're going to have to pin teams deeper into its own territory, and that punting game is really going to be the start of it in terms of where field position will begin for Case Western.
Sean giving the shout out to special teams. I love it.
Moving on to Case Western, and not the special teams, but the quarterback position. You guys mentioned Rob Kuda going for over 300 yards. That's something Billy Beecher only did once all of last season, and it was Kuda's first start. 9 different players caught passes for Kuda, and that's one thing really for this Case Western team consistently. Who are their skill position players? What makes them special? Well, with 9 guys, the open guy is the guy that Kuda's been throwing to. 462 yards of total offense in Week 1. The last time they've had 400 yards was the opener last season against Carnegie Mellon. So really an offensive explosion. And the defense only gave up 10 points for 7 punts and a missed field goal through the first 3 quarters. Chicago came down 3 for 3 on third down, scored 3 times. It happens. That's football. But Carson, to ask this defense to force turnovers, you mentioned only 12 last year. St. Vincent hasn't given the ball away. It's going to be difficult, and it's really strange because they have a defensive identity. When I think of Case Western, I think of those linebackers. But I think they need to get in the red zone. They're really efficient when they get there offensively. Kuda could be a playmaker and a difference maker for Case. But they still have to improve in terms of consistent skill position play and get that production from guys on a week-to-week basis, not just by committee. But overall, one of the better matchups we have this week. A lot of good ones this week.
Absolutely. That's our featured matchup, a 7 o'clock kickoff in Cleveland, Ohio. St. Vincent taking on the Case Western Reserve Spartans. So that's it from us, guys. I appreciate the analysis and being part of the show. Make sure to stay tuned to pacathletics.org all weekend long to stay up on the scoreboard and see what's going on with each of these respective games. Make sure to tune in next week on the PAC Football Focus. We'll be talking to Carnegie Mellon head coach Rich Lackner, and we'll be bringing you once again another PAC Pregame Show and looking into Week 4. Thank you for tuning in to the PAC Pregame Show for pacathletics.org.